So the current CSM is, we've had maybe 3 votes in the entire year, and we're just coming up at the end of CSM 15. Votes are usually just discussing what we would like to talk to them next about, or just to show the unanimity of us on a specific point. As far as, it's not like Kenneth Feld gets to be the leader and decide what's going on. It's more like we play to our strengths. If it's industry, I will keep my mouth shut and let Ken do all the talking. If it's new player experience, he lends me the same regard. If it is to do with nullification, then you can damn well bet that the FCs of Nullsec who are on the CSM are going to be talking and venturing their opinions on that sort of thing. This is one of the reasons why, in my opinion, a good CSM has a lot of variety of strengths. What's the term, the woke term these days? Diversity. You want a diversity of skill set. You don't need 12 people or 10 people who all know the same thing and answer to the same FC. You want 10 people, you want people on both sides of the big war. You want people who live in high-sec, low-sec, wormhole space. You want people who play all of the game. As a result, when CCP comes with something, there are times when they've said, we'd really like to talk to you about Lowsec, and they say, yeah, that's not on the agenda this year, sorry. And that has happened. But you go, fine, but we still have a Lowsec guy here, and anything you bring before us, he's going to put through the Lowsec filter and discuss with you from the viewpoint of Lowsec whether this is a game-breaking thing or not. If you have somebody who's high-sec, he's going to look at this and view it through the high-sec filter and say, now, most players, especially on the CSM, will advise things that might be good or bad for their personal group that they represent. A lot of us are trying for the good of the game, trying to make the game as a whole better. The problem, again, goes back to that NDA. Because with the NDA in place, we can't tell you all the reasons why CCP will do something. We can't show you the numbers that they may or may not have shown us. Occasionally we can tell you, yep, we didn't see that coming either, sandbagged us totally. But there are other times where we have done things in the dark and you will never hear about it one way or t'other because NDA. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to proving that, like I said, 2004, there were people going, the CSM is useless and should be disbanded. Personally, I disagree with them, but that's because I've been on the CSM and I've seen the changes over the years. But their opinion from the outside is it's a popularity contest. My only answer to that is yes, that's what an election often is. If they say it's all the wrong people get elected, well, did you vote? Because there are a lot of players in this game, but usually not a large enough percentage of them vote. If you want to have a say in what goes on with the CSM and with CCP, run. If you want to have a say in the second way, vote for somebody that you agree with and who is running. If you can't be bothered or haven't the time or any of the other requisites for running yourself. You can have a say in it, but you have to be willing to step up to the plate and do that say. So one of the questions was, can you name one thing that a major change that came to the game due to the CSM's influence? And I've actually got 2 that I can take blame for. And CCP has laid the blame at my feet twice for saying this is something that might push through. The existence of the Bowhead is something I found in the forums. I did not invent it, the concept, but I did agree with the concept. And so I took that to CCP and argued lots and talked to lots of different devs, and it wound up being, and this is going to be a key thing I want to mention, it wound up being I sold the deal in a pub, Nora's. in Iceland when I flew to Iceland for one of the summits. I was talking to the right guy at the right time, and he said he was just giving me all the objections to the ship. The Bowhead is a shipping ship. It is a large carrying ship that can carry fitted ships, and most Bowheads run about 2 million cubic meters for fitted ships. So in it you can fit, thank you for the link, in it you can fit 3 fully fit battleships. I have fit about 60 fitted frigates and various other arrangements like that, but it is a way to move ships. The number one usage for it at the time was for incursion rats. Not the rats, but the incursion players who would have to move from one incursion to the next as they closed one down. And prior to that, you would move your battleship, go back, get your other battleship, go back, get your logi ship. And if you were a person who did a lot of incursions, you'd wind up doing about 4 trips or 5 trips between each incursion site. And they were the ones who pushed heavily for a ship that was able to carry battleships and move them all as one thing. At one point, they were even offering it as a tugboat concept where you had one ship that towed other immobile ships. And he said, "Do you know how much of a target this is going to be?" I said, "Yep." He says, "I'm not going to let you have any weapons on it." I took a sip of my beer and said, "Yep." And he looked at me and said, "What?" I said, "It's a ship shipping ships. It's not a gun ship. It's not supposed to go into battle. Give me a tank, don't give me guns, we're good with that. If they want to protect it, they can put other ships next to it and do it as a fleet," because quite often incursions would travel at the same time, and you'd have a ton of bling ships going from point A to point B, and gankers would hang out between point A and point B to take them out. But it was funny seeing the look on the dev face when he realized I was agreeing with him and he was agreeing with me. And he said, "Yeah, I think we can swing this." And the Bowhead did become a ship. I didn't name it, but the concept that had come from the forums had a CSM representative who believed in it and fought for it with the devs in person. And this is a key thing, is I did not manage to get much of that argument out at any one session in the summit. But the summits are when the CSM is flown to Iceland to meet personally with the devs for about 3 to 5 days, depends on which summit you're talking about. It is a chance where we sit down all day in meetings for 1.5 hours, meeting with the various teams and discussing things. But when we're done in the evening, CCP occasionally, the PR guy will pick up a tab and buy a couple of rounds, but we'll go over to one of the nearby pubs and we'll sit down and just shoot the bull or talk about whatever occurs to us at the time, and is a chance to make the personal connections for a player to talk to a dev one-on-one personally. And any one of the CSM who's gone to a summit will tell you more gets done at a summit in 3 days than in the rest of the year. The rest of the year is laying the groundwork, getting to know the people, getting to know who you want to talk to, picking up the ideas, but all the real stuff gets done in the summit. Now, sadly, this year, the planet being what it is and the health being what it is, there was no summit. And I honestly feel that CSM 15 was crippled heavily by that lack of ability to go and meet them, to go and talk to them one-on-one. So the other example of the CSM having an effect that somebody asked for, that I know because I was the one who had the effect, was the drone assist. At the time, several of the large nullsec alliances had a doctrine. There was a doctrine that was almost full, giving all the drones in the fleet to like 1 or 2 pilots. So they'd have these swarming balls of death, like picture 80 or 90 drones all targeting the same thing at the same time. And it was awesome. I was a drone bunny at the time, so I thought it was awesome too, that I could pretty much, if I clicked attack for my drones, you would see a ship just almost get erased from the field if it was anything below a battleship. And even battleships would be screaming for reps because they'd have so many drones on them. And this sort of doctrine was almost becoming the flavor of the day and supplanting all other choices. It was such a good choice and such a powerful one that this is how fleets ran. As a result, there were complaints by people who ran into these giant walls of death. And so CCP planned on removing all drone assist from the game. The problem was they were answering a nullsec problem, but not looking at the rest of the game. I, as I said, have flown incursions and was a heavy incursion flyer. I've been the drone bunny. And I pointed out that drone assist in the incursions is a really necessary tool, and that I didn't want to see it removed from the game because that would cripple how the entire drone doctrine, the incursion doctrine that uses drones. And as a result, I managed to argue them to a lessening of the size of the drone ball of death, but not a complete erasure of it as they originally planned. And CCP Fozzie has said that I'm the one who stopped that from happening. So if you want to go with, has the CSM ever done anything? There's two things. And I could also point out that Brisk got rid of the red dot. So there's a third just off the top of my head.
Thank Lord the red dot was bad.
Red dot?
The red dot was if you got anything new in your inventory, a large red dot would hover on it until you actually acknowledged that the thing existed.
Ah, okay.
So we have made it slightly more optional, and that's the main thing. Quite often we ask, the CSM is always reminding CCP, can you make this something that is optional, not forced down the throats of the players? So if you make a change, can you make it so the players can decide whether they want to go with the old way or the new way? Do they want a red dot or do they not? Do they want the UI to look like this, or can they have it the way they've always had it? Anytime there are large changes, we fight for the ability for the most access. We talk to them and remind them about color blindness. We talk to them and remind them that there are people who are running on computers that barely are more powerful than a Casio watch. And that is why they instituted potato mode. So we are at the end of the second set trio. So I'm opening the floor up to questions again.
Speaking about recent changes, one thing I have interest in is the Marauder changes. Know how much of an influence the CSM had in that regard?
I'm trying to think of the specific changes. Can you remind me a little more? Was this just a balance pass?
So a couple of months back, Marauders, the time for which they would be in Bastion was increased, and then people, basically, community said this is awful and Marauders were never used. And then they were toned down, so now that Bastion is only 30 seconds and they added a ton of buffs to it as well, which seemed out of nowhere after nerfing it. So I was wondering if the CSM had any influence in regards to that, if you know.
Well, I would know. Like I said, I've been in the CSM for the past year. So yes, we had influence on some of that stuff quite often, and that leads to a larger answer than just this one specifically. So let me go through this, and then I'll see if I answer the question accidentally. There are a ton of ways that the current CSM can communicate with CCP. We have a wiki where they can post information that they're planning on doing. We don't get to see all of the stuff they do, but they share specific pages with us. So when something like the Marauder changes come up, they'll post the before and after little arrows. Kind of quite often the wiki leads to the, when they post publicly what the changes are, the patch notes. That's very close to what we'll see, but more in a slightly less fancy background and just a straight wiki. And we will comment on quite often, why are you doing this? Or that is never going to work and nobody is going to do that for the amount of ISK it costs. And so it becomes a discussion where we're almost haggling with them for, I agree with the change that nobody's using it. I disagree with the amount of change. And quite often, I don't think anybody can make a perfect change, because there's always someone arguing that no matter where you set the dial, it's either too much or too little. And quite often, devs like CCP Rise does a ton of balancing and is a great guy to talk to, interacts very much with us. He is willing to listen. And we have very frank discussions with him going, you are breaking this, or you are, that may work. And then quite often the follow-up is, how will you know that it worked? Like if you change the dial, what will tell you that it was a good change as opposed to just a change? And that's one thing I often push for, is saying, can you tell me what metric we're going to be looking at? It will be how many of them make kills, how many of them are in use or in flight, because quite often ships like that become hangar queens because you just can't fly them anymore. I have a couple of T3Cs, T3 cruisers I just don't fly because I don't get into the situation where I see them as actually being worth getting into anymore. So we also have once a week, we have a visual, the equivalent of a Zoom chat. We do it with Microsoft Teams, but that's beside the point. We have daily interaction with them via the Wiki and via another channel. So we can talk to specific devs. I know Ken has probably got a permanent hotline to the dev who's doing most of the industry things. I talk a lot to the guy who does specific things in the area that I'm interested in and following and know the most about. So yes, we had input. No, I can't tell you whether we managed to calm it down, boost it up, or anything like that. But usually it's them looking at the usage stats for a ship to say, is this being overused or is it being underused? Which is how CCP makes a lot of their decisions. It's how they removed walking in stations. They did the stats of all of this server time is going to about 10% of the populace ever checks into walking in stations, and the rest just ignore it. So why are we putting so much server power to something that not enough players use?
Okay, I think that answered the question. I was just very interested because we were talking about incursions, and as an incursion runner, the Marauder changes have made them extremely influential in incursions.
Cool. I've always been, like I said, when I flew incursions, and I haven't been doing it for a couple of years, but I still consider myself an incursion runner, even if I don't show up. I just wonder how many of the old people are still there that would remember me. But I flew Logi, I was a drone bunny, and I was only DPS when I was too tired to do anything else, because DPS is the least demanding of all the skills, especially if you have a good FC who's, tagging everything. So it's just, I shoot the letters, you shoot the numbers. When we're done, we get paid.
You also have a couple of questions from Ricky in the questions channel.
Okay, I'm going to read the questions out loud, and if I miss one, let me know. But one is, are there any regulations to prevent conflicts of interest that come up when alliance leaders are elected? No. Like I said, Mittens got elected twice. He was removed from the CSM the second time because that was right when the wizard hat happened. That's a piece of history, and ask me at the end if you're curious what the hell the wizard hat was. But the one conflict of interest, it's funny because this is the exact reversal of the original CSM that I was talking about at the beginning, is you cannot be a member of a game media company or of another gaming company. And as a result, and this came up in CSM 10, and one of the players at the time kicked up a huge fuss, but it was Sion Kumatoto, who was the Matani's right-hand man at the time and head diplo for the Goons, Imperium, whatever you want to call them. But the Imperium had a website that was actually making money. He was editor of that as well. And as a result, CCP declared it a conflict of interest and would not allow him to run again. So yes, there are conflicts of interest that come up, but nothing about, Billy is in, and you look at some of the people running this year are leaders of their organizations. The one thing I would, and this is slowly phasing into the next thing, but I will stop for a few more questions before I plow on. The one thing for you to worry about is if you have somebody who has too much on their plate, they're the leader of an organization, or they're the best FC that organization has, and there's a war on, they're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul, which means they will not be able to dedicate enough time to both things. You only have 24 hours in a day. As a result, something is going to be lacking. And it's either they're not going to be doing as good a job as FC leader of the Alliance or whatever, or they're not going to be doing as good a job as a CSM. The one thing I can tell you for sure is CSM takes a lot of time if you do it right. Like somebody can tell you, I hardly spend half an hour a week on it, if that. They're a shit CSM. If you want to do representation of the people, you have to be trying to follow all the various media outlets. You have to be talking to players. You have to be going out and being in fleets and talking to them. You have to be doing things. And there are also meetings. We have several hours, at minimum of 1 hour a week, locked in. For us, it's Thursdays, where we meet with CSM every week. But quite often they'll be saying, oh, this team can't make it then. Can we do a Tuesday one, or can we do a Monday one? And you got to remember, seeing as I'm on West Coast of North America and CCP is in Iceland, there is a very narrow time window. I can't talk to them during their 10 in the morning, because their 10 in the morning is about 2 in the morning for me, or 4 in the morning. But in the past, for CSM 8, I did telecommute on some of the worst connection lines you have ever seen. One CSM member, who I will not name, but I still laugh about every time I think of it, fell asleep during a summit that he was telecommuting to, because he lay down on the couch, put his laptop on his chest, and was talking to us during that. And halfway through a meeting, all of a sudden, his mic was nothing but snoring. And we had to do the rest of the meeting with him snoring because we couldn't wake him up. Merrick, that's a great question. Believe it or not, there is actually a part of the security team for CCP who are tasked with watching us. And can somebody, first person type it, name me a ship, please, just so I don't accidentally say something that would be incorrect. Just name me a ship. Tristan. Suppose they decided that Tristans are now going to be able to be +3 warp core stabs nullified and have a intrinsic cloak to them, so you don't have to fit a module to it. And I decided, holy shit, they're going to become valuable, and went out and bought 500 Tristans. CCP would catch me. They would boot me off of the CSM and possibly ban me from the game as a whole. This happened in about CSM 11 or 12, where a player couldn't resist. There was a big change coming. He saw it coming, and he acted on it and did a large purchase just prior to the announcements, which meant when the market did its changes right after the announcements, he made a few $100 billion. And CCP said, you were bad. He was removed from the CSM. I think he got a 1-month ban in the game. He made a public apology. But yeah, they watch us to make sure that we can't act on it. Now, can I be absolutely positively sure that a CSM member has not talked to a secure person or persons? Like, let's pick an alliance that I know exists but has nobody in it. Demcell. Demcell is a demolition and salvage alliance. It exists in the game, but if a player from there talked to his CEO, and the CEO said, okay, everybody buy a few Tristans, and managed to spread out the purchase so it looked semi-normal, and then the organization as a whole made the hundreds of billions. Can I prove that that's never happened? No. So there's always accusations that the Goons, Pandemic Legion, Pandemic Horde, Brave, all of them have been accused of inside information or trading upon it. And unless you got proof, it's really hard to do. But knowing that you're being watched, and if there are large purchases and it gets back to you, you can get burned. Now, the other one that happened and then didn't happen is there were accusations that Brisk Rubel did that. And the CCP went so far as to ban him from the game. And he protested because he is a public figure as a real person, this actually impinged on his public persona, on his real life, that this would be, you were accusing a person of malfeasance and breach of an NDA. And that made a big difference for him. And so he demanded that they actually show the receipts, and they wound up apologizing and saying, no, we did it on word of accusation, which is a scary, scary thing. That if you accuse, even if there wasn't proof, CCP jumped the gun and pulled the trigger on somebody. Fortunately, at that point, they had somebody who was willing to fight back and say, not good enough, not going to let it happen.